Okay, next we're going to talk about why calibrate. Um, these are some of the challenges that a lot of dealers run into when trying to quote unquote convince a customer why they should have their TV calibrated. And a lot of times we see out there dealers and even calibrators out there will sometimes kind of overly complicate and over explain the service. And that kind of leaves the customer with a kind of a weird feeling. They don't really know what you're talking about. They think the picture's pretty good already. So I just wanted to take some time here to give some tips on things you can talk about with dealers and with customers when it comes down to why you should calibrate a display. Number one is very easy. We want to see all the details in the brightest and darkest parts of the picture. We've all been there before where you're watching a dark movie, the screen or the TV that you're watching on has not been calibrated, so it's really difficult to see the shadows. We also have to worry about the brightest parts of the picture as well. So if I'm watching, say, a football game that's being shot outside, I want to see all the details in the jerseys, for example. Or if I'm watching a nature documentary with clouds in the sky, I want to be able to see all the details in the clouds in the sky as well. We also want the most natural skin tones. That's a really big thing to us, to our visual system, especially as humans. We're very, very, very used to seeing skin tones. We look at each other every day. So if skin tones are off, if they're the wrong color or oversaturated, for example, it's really easy for somebody to spot that. We also want to worry about the most accurate color. If I'm a big sports fan, I want my jerseys to be the correct color, for example. If I'm a film buff or if I'm a videophile, I want the color of the image I'm looking at on the screen to be as close to humanly possible as the color that the artist used to make that picture. So we really emphasize on accuracy, and you can see this a lot. And like I said, sports logos and commercials where you see logos that you're familiar with and things like that as well. The other thing we're looking for too is the clearest possible picture. There's lots of settings in the TV that can alter the resolution, that can make the picture look blurry or out of focus even. So we want that picture to be as clear as possible for the customer. Again, I'll say this again, we want to experience the content as the creators intended. Take a movie like Avatar, for example. It was made with huge budget, lots and lots of CGI, lots of emphasis went into the color of that movie. So if you're watching that movie on a non-calibrated display, you're not seeing the color exactly how it was meant to be seen. And if we look at film as a form of art, which I'm sure most of you do, we want to honor that art as best as possible. We want to see the image as intended. When we calibrate a system, it's fully custom. It's based on the room, the system, and how we see as humans. This is something that we typically always talk to the integrators and talk to calibrators about getting the customer involved. There's certain test patterns you might want to look at with your eyes and have the customer look at it with their eyes as well. And again, this is all based on room lighting, where the customer sits, and how well they see. You know, some people have to sit a little closer, some people like to sit a little further away. Some people's vision is better than others. So again, it's going to be important sometimes to bring that customer in to look at some of the test patterns. For integrators especially, this is pure revenue. You know, this is a service where it's straight labor. So if you're charging for this service as an upgrade, or if you're visiting a client who maybe didn't buy the TV from you, but they're hiring you for the calibration, this is pure labor, pure profit. Of course, once the gear is all paid for. There are some other dealer benefits too that we'll talk about a little bit later. So I wanted to show you a quick example of why all this stuff is important. And this is uh, a series of pictures I took while dealing with a client with a nice projector in a nice theater room. A very common projector, very big name brand, and this is very common to calibrators out there. Now, when we go to calibrate a display, whether it's a projector or a flat panel, the display is always going to have some picture presets with some kind of predetermined levels for color and contrast, brightness, and things like that. These presets that come, from the factory or out of the box, if you will, are never really that close or never really that great compared to what a calibrated image will look at. And this is a really good example of what you're seeing on the screen right now. So this is actually the splash screen from the first John Wick movie. Right before the movie starts, you see these different logos of different production companies and different companies who worked on the film, and this happened to be Summit Entertainment's splash screen. So what we're looking at here are a series of pictures. The top picture is a preset in the projector called Living Room. The bottom picture is a preset in the projector called THX. Now the living room setting was the out-of-the-box setting. So the end user or the installer would plug this projector in and turn it on, and it's on the living room setting. Now there are some other presets in the projector and in TVs that do get you a little bit closer to what the standard is, but they're usually still pretty far off too. And you can notice this in this bottom picture of this THX image. So the THX image in this particular projector was the closest out of the box to the standard. And if you notice it, if you're looking at the bottom picture right now, it's very green. So the top is out of the box. It's almost a cyan color. The bottom is green, which is the closest one out of the box for this particular product. Now look at the middle picture. That's the calibrated image. White is actually white. So you guys can start to get a feel now for what happens to the image if the color is wrong. If I start to look at a movie or a TV show with the THX preset on this particular projector, everything's going to look green. All my shadows will look green. My skin tones will look green. And to our eyes as humans, green is the worst color to have too much of. Everything looks sick and kind of gross, and it's just not a very good experience for anybody. So, you know, again, as you can see, the presets that come from the factory out of the box, some of them are really far off, some of them are a little closer, but still far off. And part of the job of the calibrator is to get all that stuff set to a standard. We'll take a look at some other examples here, just pictures I've collected over the years. You'll notice in this hockey arena, you've got nice normal white ice, but when you look up at the Jumbotron, the ice is kind of this purple color. Great candidate for calibration. On the bottom two examples here, we've got a couple of sports bars. On this particular picture, bottom left, you've got the sort of normal looking color, normal looking grass. Not to say that this is necessarily this TV has been calibrated, but you can tell just by looking at it that it's at least in a better picture mode out of the box. Versus on the left side of the screen, the grass looks kind of radioactive and kind of fake and kind of cartoony. What you can't see here, what the camera did not pick up, is that in the referee's hat, the white's all completely blown out on this TV, and you can actually see some detail in the white hat on this TV. So this just told me that this particular TV is probably in some sort of vivid or dynamic mode. This TV is probably in some sort of mode like theater or cinema or something like that. But even with that being said, I'm sure there's still plenty of things that can be improved on the right TV. And if this was really done well, both TVs would be calibrated and they would look the same. So the idea here is that I can watch a football game in this bar that might have 4, 5, 6 TVs in it. No matter what TV I'm sitting in front of, it's a nice, comfortable image to look at. The colors look natural. The sports teams look natural. This looks like a Packers game, so the yellow is correct on the helmet and things like that. Bottom right, you'll see another extreme example. The TV on the right, without getting too deep into it, you can tell just by looking at it, there's a lot of blue there and things like that. But the TV on the left was obviously way out of whack, tons of blue there. And again, this is all just about consistency and making the experience good for whoever's watching these TVs. In the upper right picture here, you'll see an example of a video wall, a 4x3 video wall at an airport. And you should be able to see this pretty easily, but we have a fairly neutral gray in the background of all these images, and these two images, bottom left and middle left, those images kind of have some blue in them. And again, this is funny to show you just a picture of, but in real life with your own eyeballs, this is way, way, way worse than what the camera picked up. So you can only imagine how bad this looks in this airport. Okay, now that we've seen some examples of good and bad, let's talk about what actually makes a great picture. These are the things that we talk about when describing picture quality with customers, and these are some things that you can talk about with dealers as well, especially dealers who have not been to the ISF class or been to the PVA class. These are the things that we teach in those classes on how to judge an image for picture quality. So the number one most important thing to the picture, to our eyes, is dynamic range. Now, what does that mean? Dynamic range is the difference between the darkest and the brightest parts of the picture. So the idea here is to get your black levels to be as dark as possible, your white levels to be as bright as possible. But with the calibration, we also want to make sure that those everything is visible in those details as well. So it's not just about making the blacks pure black and making the whites pure white. We want to see all the details in between as well. Number 2 on the list is color saturation. And that's simply just how colorful is the picture. If there's too much color, you end up with that kind of radioactive looking green grass we saw in the example before. You end up with oversaturated skin tones, which tends to make people look kind of orange or sunburned. If there's not enough color in the picture, that's when things can start to look really pale and kind of washed out and kind of dingy. So we want to make sure the right amount of color is in the picture, and that's what color saturation is all about. Number 3, colorimetry, just a fancy word for color accuracy. Going back to that Green Bay Packers example we used on the previous slide, if the colorimetry on the display is correct, then that helmet will be the correct yellow, or at least be very, very, very close to it. And then last but not least on the list, number 4, resolution. These are the fine details. When we look at a picture, we're looking for clarity, we're looking for noise, we're even looking at things like the picture shape and the picture size. If the picture's been stretched out or zoomed in any way, that's going to cause some distortions and not give you the most accurate picture possible. So next, we're going to look at each one of these 4 things kind of broken down one by one. I'll give you some examples as well. So I mentioned dynamic range being the most important part of the picture. And here we have a couple of examples here of what might happen if the dynamic range of the display is not set up correctly or just not very good in general. So if we take a look at the gentleman up here in the upper right corner, he's wearing a white shirt with white buttons, and it's very easy to see all these wrinkles in the seams and whatnot. If the contrast on the display is too high, you might get these really bright whites, but the trade-off is all the details lost. So if we cranked up the contrast on this monitor, we would lose these wrinkles, we would lose these buttons, we would lose the seams, we would lose the pocket, and you would just be looking at a blown out white shirt. Not a very good experience. It makes things look really bright, so it's very fatiguing on your eyes. It makes it hard to look at, and all the details gone. So all bad things. Now, in dynamic range, remember, it's about the bright and the dark parts of the picture. So if we look at an example of the dark parts of the picture, here we have a guy up against a black background with a black shirt and a black jacket. Now, ideally, what we want to see in this image is the black background, the black jacket, and black shirt. We actually can right now, but what I did for this image, just so you could see it, is I turned up the black level on this image pretty high just to see the difference between the 3 shades of black. Again, the background being one shade, the shirt being another, the jacket being another. Now, what you'll also notice in this image is a big black X. This image came from a calibration disc made by Monster Cable and the Imaging Science Foundation and Microsoft many years ago. And this is one of those discs you could pop in just to sort of evaluate a system and make some minor adjustments to it. In this particular image, we're actually not supposed to see this black X. It should blend in with the background. So what does this tell us? If the black levels are too high and I can see this black X, that means that the picture is going to be very washed out. I'm sure you guys have seen this before. Now, if the black levels are too low, the opposite happens. Not only does the X blend in with the background, but the jacket blends in with the background, the shirt blends in with the jacket, and now we cannot see any details in the dark parts of the picture. These are the kind of things that we see when we watch scary movies or dark video games. If the TV's not calibrated, all that dark detail is lost, and it can be very frustrating, especially if you're trying to play a video game, trying to see who's hiding in the shadows and whatnot. So again, we want white to be bright, we want black to be black and nice and dark, but we also want to see the details in between. This is what's going to affect the picture the most. Next, we look at color saturation, and as I mentioned before, that's simply how much color is in the picture. There's a few things that we look at when talking about color saturation, and probably the easiest thing for most people to look at are skin tones. As we look at the image in the upper right corner, this is an image that's on several of the Murideo products. It's to judge skin tones. So as we are looking at this image, I'm just looking for the skin tone to be nice and natural and as normal looking as possible. What you'll see on the bottom portion of the screen here is an example of a movie. I took this picture, calibrated and not calibrated. And it's a young girl, she's in a park, it's a nice sunny day. You should see all the details, she should look pretty normal. On the left side of the screen here, she has, a normal skin tone. There's even some wrinkles here in her red shirt. You can see detail, it's all good, it's all fine. On the right side, this is a TV on the factory settings. You see that the red dress is kind of this orange color, the detail's gone, and there's a lot of pink and flushness to her skin tone here. So completely looks wacky, the image is completely ruined. But again, this is the factory setting from this particular TV out of the box. So this is why it's so important to get in front of the dealers and get in front of the customers to show them these examples and talk about these things. Because honestly, guys, this is one of those things where if somebody's used to looking at the picture like this, they don't realize how bad it is because they've never seen it correctly before. So using these things as references, using these test patterns like what we see in the Murideo products, this portrait displays test pattern up here, very simple examples to show people good and bad about the picture. Next on the list is colorimetry. As I said before, this is sort of a fancy way of describing color accuracy. This is the third most important aspect when we talk about picture quality. And really what colorimetry is all about is how accurate is the color. So the first example we'll look at here is an example of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, when someone that works for the Minnesota Vikings is sitting down and designing these logos and designing these colors, there's a whole entire process that goes down to pick what the Minnesota Vikings color should be. So when that color is shown on TV, when that color is used to make jerseys and merchandise and things like that, it should be the same color no matter what, no matter where you are in the world. The purple and the yellow should be the same. So there are standards on what this purple and what this yellow should be. So if we take a look at the Vikings purple, for example, we have this RGB code, 79, 38, 131. And without getting too technical, without getting too into it, this tells us the amount of red, green, and blue that are in this purple to make that purple. Now, what's cool is I can take the Murideo generator and I can input these same exact numbers. Then I can measure the display that the generator is connected to, and I should have relatively the same purple. And that's really the whole idea. The Vikings logo is pretty simple. There's a purple and a gold, and that's it. But there are other teams out there with very complicated and complex logos. Take the Chicago Blackhawks, for example, a hockey team. They have 5 or 6 colors in their logo. So getting these colors to look correct and be correct is a very, very important part of the process. Now, the problem is that we see on televisions, one of the main things that you see is out of the box, the color is wrong. And one of the ways that they get the color wrong is the grayscale has too much red, green, or blue in it. That's all the grayscale is, right? It's a mixture of red, green, and blue. Now, what we'll look at here is an example of a grayscale on the bottom image here, which is actually correct. So it should look relatively gray on your screen, depending on if it's calibrated or not, of course. The middle picture here is a grayscale with too much blue in it. And as you can probably see, there's kind of a blue cast or blue haze to this particular picture. If we go to the top picture here, there's too much red in the mix. So it kind of has this almost sepia look, almost like it's an old movie or something like that. Now, the important point to point out here is that the gray at the bottom is actually the correct gray. The other two examples are incorrect gray. So if we can get the grayscale correct, we can make the colors look correct and everybody's happy. Last but not least on this list is the resolution. Again, I mentioned this before. This is all about the overall sharpness of the display, making sure that there's not any artifacts from the sharpness being too high or from some extra feature in the display being turned on. The other thing that we look at here too, when we talk about resolution, is the aspect ratio. What you'll notice in a lot of TVs is they have different aspect ratio modes depending on the content you're watching. So you might have like a stretch mode for 4:3 content, or you might have a zoom mode for content where there's bars on the top and bottom. The job of the calibrator is to match the content to the display itself. So if we're watching a normal TV show that is shot in a 16:9 aspect ratio, of course we want to see it in a 16:9 aspect ratio. The problem is that we see on a lot of displays, as I mentioned before, is that they have these different modes. So the calibrator is going to use a test pattern, such as this geometry pattern down here, and the calibrator is going to make sure that they can see the entire test pattern and that everything in this test pattern looks nice and clear. The other thing we have to worry about too in a lot of displays is something called overscan, where they will intentionally zoom in on the picture just a little bit. You can see this in this top example. In this top example, you see a feed from CBS showing a football game, and around the edges, you can see the entire image. Well, what a lot of TVs will do is they'll zoom in on the picture just a little bit, so to eliminate any potential distortion or anything at the top of the screen that the broadcasters are supposed to see, but the end users are not supposed to see. So in a very common scenario, you'll have a TV that zooms in 2, 3, 4, 5%, and you end up cropping the picture and you end up actually only seeing the red portion of this image. So you end up with a referee over here that's chopped in half, a guy over here who's chopped in half. You're not seeing the entire image anymore. And the other thing about this that really can kind of hurt you is when you zoom in on a picture, it does tend to make it less clear as well. So when we talk about resolution, it's about getting the sharpness set correctly, getting the aspect ratio set correctly, making sure that the picture is the right shape and the right size.